Somewhere right now, a person is lying in bed staring at a ceiling instead of a screen and feeling something they cannot quite name. It is not relief, it is not peace, it is something closer to withdrawal, the same restless itch you might feel giving up sugar or caffeine. They quit social media 3 days ago, and their brain is still asking where everyone went. This feeling is not weakness, and it is not your imagination. It is a measurable, documented response happening inside the most reward-sensitive part of the human brain. And what happens after that itch fades is something almost nobody warns you about. To understand what happens when you stop using social media, you first have to understand what social media was actually doing to you while you used it. Every notification, every like, every new follower triggers a small release of dopamine, the same chemical messenger involved in gambling, sugar, and even certain drugs of abuse. This is not an exaggeration designed to scare you. Researchers studying behavioral addiction have found that the unpredictable nature of social media rewards, never knowing exactly when the next like or comment will arrive, creates a pattern strikingly similar to a slot machine. You pull the lever by opening the app. Sometimes you win big with hundreds of likes. Sometimes you win nothing. And your brain, wired by millions of years of evolution to chase uncertain rewards, keeps pulling that lever again and again, refreshing the feed just one more time. Now imagine removing that lever completely. For the first few days after quitting, many people report a strange kind of restlessness, an almost physical urge to check a phone that has nothing new to show them. This is often called digital withdrawal, and it mirrors symptoms seen in other behavioral dependencies, including irritability, anxiety, and difficulty concentrating. One widely discussed study asked participants to abstain from social media for just 1 week. Within the first 48 hours, many described feeling oddly disoriented, almost as if they had lost a limb they did not know they were using. This is the part most people do not expect. Quitting social media does not feel like freedom at first. It feels like loss. But here's where the story takes its first unexpected turn. That uncomfortable feeling does not last as long as people fear it will. By around day 3 or 4, something begins to shift. The constant urge to check notifications starts to quiet down, not because the craving disappears completely, but because the brain begins recalibrating its reward expectations. Dopamine receptors, which had become accustomed to frequent small hits of stimulation, slowly begin resetting toward a more balanced baseline. This is similar to what happens when someone reduces their sugar intake. The first few days feel unbearable, but gradually, ordinary things, a walk outside, a quiet meal, a real conversation, start to feel more satisfying than they did before. Researchers who study digital detox describe this as a return to natural reward sensitivity, the brain rediscovering pleasure in things that do not come from a screen. This shift often arrives alongside something even more surprising, a dramatic change in self-perception. Social media, especially platforms built around images and curated lifestyles, encourages constant comparison. Psychologists call this social comparison theory, the idea that humans naturally evaluate themselves by measuring their lives against others. The problem is that the people we compare ourselves to online are rarely living ordinary lives. We're comparing our average Tuesday to someone else's most exciting vacation, their best photo, their proudest achievement. One large-scale psychological study found that heavy social media use was strongly associated with increased feelings of inadequacy, especially among younger users, many of whom reported feeling worse about their appearance, their finances, or their relationships after scrolling, even when nothing in their actual life had changed. When people stop using these platforms, this comparison loop simply stops feeding itself. Many describe a noticeable drop in anxiety about how they look or how their life measures up, almost as if a constant background noise had finally gone silent. Sleep is another area where the change becomes almost impossible to ignore. The blue light emitted by phone screens suppresses melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep cycles. But the effect of social media on sleep goes beyond just light exposure.
Scrolling late at night activates the brain's alertness systems precisely when they should be winding down, and emotionally charged content, whether exciting, upsetting, or anxiety-inducing, keeps the mind racing long after the phone is finally put down. People who quit social media frequently report falling asleep faster, waking up less during the night, and feeling more rested in the morning, even without changing anything else about their routine. Some describe this improvement as so significant that they assumed something else in their life had changed, until they realized the missing piece was simply the absence of nightly scrolling. Then there's attention, perhaps the most quietly damaged resource of the digital age. Social media platforms are engineered, often by teams of behavioral scientists and design psychologists, to capture and hold attention for as long as possible. Endless scrolling, autoplay videos, and algorithmically optimized content are not accidental features. They are deliberately designed using principles of operant conditioning, the same psychological framework used to train behavior in both animals and humans. The longer you stay, the more advertising revenue is generated, which means engagement, not your well-being, is the platform's core objective. When people remove these platforms from their daily life, many report a surprising return of something they thought they had lost forever: the ability to focus on a single task for an extended period of time without feeling a compulsive urge to check their phone, reading a book again without distraction, sitting through a movie without glancing at a screen, having a conversation without thinking about how to photograph it. These small moments, once ordinary, can feel almost revolutionary after weeks of fragmented attention. Relationships also shift in ways that surprise many people. While social media promises connection, psychologists have long debated whether it actually deepens relationships or merely simulates them. A well-known concept called the quantity over quality effect suggests that social media often replaces small numbers of deep, meaningful interactions with large numbers of shallow ones. Liking a friend's photo feels like connection, but it rarely carries the emotional depth of an actual phone call or a face-to-face conversation. When people step away from these platforms, many notice an unexpected increase in real-world contact. They call old friends instead of scrolling past their updates. They make plans instead of liking posts about other people's plans. Loneliness researchers have found that this shift from passive observation to active engagement tends to improve feelings of social connection far more effectively than the platforms ever did, even though those same platforms are marketed as solutions to loneliness. Of course, not everything about quitting social media is universally positive, and a fair documentary on this subject has to acknowledge the more complicated middle ground. For some people, especially those who rely on these platforms for business, community building, or staying connected with family overseas, complete removal can create new challenges. Some experience a temporary sense of isolation, especially if their social circle exists primarily online. Others worry about missing important news or feeling disconnected from cultural conversations happening in real time. This is why many psychologists don't necessarily recommend permanent, complete abstinence for everyone, but rather intentional, mindful usage, distinguishing between scrolling out of boredom and using these tools with clear purpose. The real question is not always whether to quit entirely, but whether your relationship with these platforms is something you control or something that controls you. This brings us to one of the most fascinating findings in recent psychological research: the concept of digital self-awareness. People who take even short breaks from social media, as little as 1 week, often report a heightened awareness of their own habits once they return. They notice themselves reaching for their phone out of boredom rather than genuine interest. They notice how often they compare themselves to others. They notice how certain accounts make them feel anxious, inadequate, or strangely empty. Patterns that became invisible through years of repetition, but become impossible to ignore even briefly. This single shift, simple awareness, may be one of the most powerful psychological tools available, because the brain cannot meaningfully change a habit it has stopped noticing. So what does this all reveal about who we really are underneath the algorithms, the notifications, and the carefully curated photos? Perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: social media did not create new desires within us. It simply amplified ancient ones: our hunger for social approval, our fear of being left out, our deep evolutionary need to belong to a group. These instincts existed long before smartphones, long before the internet, long before screens of any kind. What changed is that for the first time in human history, these primal needs are being deliberately engineered and monetized at a scale our ancestors could never have imagined. Stepping away from social media, even briefly, does not just reveal what the platforms were doing to your brain, it reveals what your brain was always capable of feeling on its own, quietly, patiently, waiting underneath the noise for you to finally notice it again.